Boris Johnson finally faces MPs today for what is expected to be a highly charged session of Prime Minister's questions. And it's members of his own party who are also urging him to come clean about whether or not he was at that party held at number 10 on the 20th of May 2020.
Well, joining us now is author Michael Rosen, who was in a coma with COVID at the time of the party, Boris Johnson's biographer, Sonia Purnell, and human rights barrister, Adam Wagner. Actually, Sonia, I'd like to come to you first of all. You've profiled Boris Johnson, you've profiled his psychology, the kind of stuff that makes him tick. How will he be ticking right now?
Well, I think he'll be... There have been many moments in his life where he has been caught doing something that's not good, not right, telling an untruth. And so far, all the way through his life, and he's in his mid to late 50s now, he's always got away with it. So I'm sure he's thinking that the likelihood is that he'll get away with it again. Maybe he'll give us a sort of apology. Maybe he'll say, I only kind of was walking through, or they were all working very hard. Whatever it is that he comes up with, it'll be very interesting to see at parliamentary Prime Minister's questions later. But it's just this time, it's more difficult for him to get away with it because it's not one-to-one, it's the entire country who's watching. And a lot of people feel very emotional about this because it touches their own lives and their own experiences and their own loss. And I think this one is more difficult for him to get away with, even if you might call him the Houdini of British politics.
Sonia, I don't know if you were watching what happened in the Commons yesterday, but Jim Shannon, the DUP MP, stood up, and it almost seemed to catch him unawares how upset he then became about the fact that he'd lost his own mother-in-law and that she died alone, and he wept openly in the House of Commons. We can see the pictures there. Because this isn't just professional, is it, Sonia? This is personal. As you say, this affects everybody personally. And you were personally affected by what happened back in May 2020, exactly the time when this party was taking place.
Yes, my mother's funeral was actually the day before, and I don't want to do a Jim Shannon, but there she is. I mean, she died in a care home. She died from COVID. They were releasing people from hospital who had COVID back into the care home. Everyone on her floor in the care home died. I hadn't seen her since March because the care home was in lockdown. These were very, very difficult times, and I would still, even if I'd known what was going on in Downing Street, I'm sure I still would have obeyed the rules because that seemed to be the right thing to do. But it is very hard, I think, for us to feel the complete lack of respect that emanates from Downing Street, from this affair and so many others. I mean, how many are they investigating now? 9, 10 parties. There's obviously a really toxic culture in Downing Street where it's all about them. It's not about the rest of us, where they can tell lies and obfuscate and somehow not get caught. I mean, how come we haven't heard about this for a year? How come no police officer? Apparently the noise was quite loud. Someone was walking past the wall and thought, well, what's that party going on?
I think you're absolutely right. I find it extraordinary that the Metropolitan Police have not intervened up until now. We don't know what they're going to do. Michael Rosen, you tweeted yesterday, I'm sorry I couldn't attend the party on the 20th of May 2020. I was in a coma. Just my luck. I mean, Michael, the whole point of these restrictions was to stop people getting COVID, being in a coma with COVID, dying of COVID. So when you find out that the people who are making the laws that are supposed to protect everybody were breaking them, what was your reaction?
Well, it's horrible, isn't it? You can see that I've tried to get away from the horror by making a sort of silly joke, but that's what I do. But it feels horrible. Sonia has said it all, really. This is a time of not only of all this personal pain that people are going through, but there is also an element in which it becomes a kind of social trauma that we're trying to deal with. And at times like this, we expect and hope that governments can somehow or other make a space, make a time to help us heal about this stuff. That's why we have things at the cenotaph. It's why we have services. And instead of there being some way in which this government is helping us through to cope with it communally, it looks as if they didn't care, perhaps even having a jolly, having a bash in the way they talk about these things. Bring your own booze. It's like kind of, well, hey. And if I think I was lying there in a coma and I could have died at any second, quite literally, because I had 3 blood clots in my pulmonary arteries. You can see that Emma was allowed in there. You can see that picture. That was 2 or 3 days later. In order to try and get me to wake up, I was taken out into a space outside of the ward. I'm still in my bed there, in order to try and wake me up. And that was, with a lot of care and PPE and all sorted and very heavily ventilated, because they were so worried that I wouldn't wake up after 40 days in the coma. But all that time, I've heard Emma and the family talk about it. They literally waiting by the phone would ring, and was it Michael's gone? Michael's dead or not? This is later. This picture is at the rehab hospital in June. And we were allowed outside in the garden under regulations.
Under regulations. Well, look, let's come to Adam. With your barrister's hat on, Adam, if Boris Johnson does a mea culpa in 3 hours' time, holds his hands up and says, yes, I was there, I did it, and I shouldn't, and I'm really sorry, what legal defence can he then advance to get him off the hook?
Yeah, so it's a problem what he says, and I imagine this is what he's thinking about at the moment, because if he comes out and says, look, this party should never have happened, it was against the rules, then that potentially lands everybody who was there in legal jeopardy, because they could potentially be prosecuted because they were outside of the house without a reasonable excuse, except for Boris Johnson and Carrie, because they were in their house. So they were already at home. So they weren't outside of their home. I mean, there's a possibility they could be in line for, being accessories to other people's crimes, but that's just a bit more difficult. So it's a real minefield for him. And I think one of the reasons why I'm guessing that the government have been so adamant that they did nothing wrong, and they haven't actually denied anything. They've just said the guidelines were followed, is because as soon as they say guidelines weren't followed, then they potentially are going to be investigated by the police. So I mean, my prediction is Boris Johnson will give an apology, a sort of non-apology apology. I'm so sorry that everybody thinks we did something wrong kind of apology, but I mean, who knows?
OK, and Sonia, just to come back to you and finish with you, and very briefly, please, because we're out of time. What do you make of the fact that it seems that Boris Johnson left Downing Street about an hour ago, lying on the back seat of the Range Rover, out of sight of photographers? No Prime Minister's ever left Downing Street lying on the back of their car.
Michael's laughing at that.
Yeah, well, it's what happened. Go on, Sonia.
What happened to dignity in British politics? A Prime Minister behaving like a Prime Minister as opposed to a schoolboy. This is a country in crisis. We've got COVID, we've got the fallout from Brexit, we've lost our international standing, the economy is in a mess, people are still in hospital, the virus is still out there, and we've got a Prime Minister who's a joke, frankly, and who we just simply cannot trust.
OK, thank you all very much indeed for your time.
Honestly, powerful testimony from all of you, and thank you so much for joining us this morning, and we'll wait and see what the Prime Minister does when he gets up off the back seat of the car and appears in the House of Commons at midday.